Hi, it's Jeff Spock from Amplitude Studios, back with another of our focus videos for Endless Legend. In the previous one, we wrapped up the cycle on the factions in the game. One of the things we've heard a lot about is the art. Both the 2D, the 3D art, the animation, we've got a lot of nice comments, so we wanted to do a focus video on the art in the art department and how we get that and how we put it in the game. So the first step basically is the art director, the creative director, the whole creative team gets together, throws around ideas for what the faction is. I get to help with that as the lead writer. That's a fun part of my job. Then the art director will go find some references, some inspirations, and the department concept artists will come up with some nice big 2D images of the village the faction might live in, how the towns would be laid out, what they'd wear, how they go about their daily life. These make it into the first set of concept images. From those we pull out the images of, or the ideas for the buildings, for the units, which one of our 2D artists will use to come up with lots of crazy ideas that we go through. We pick the ones we like the best. Then he'll go back and put in, there you see it, the color, the shading, give it a little volume, make it a little more realistic. Which this version of it then, once it's finalized, goes to a 3D artist. He'll do a high definition version of it, export the normal map from there, and then it will use another tool to put in the polygons, the color, so you see the basic form of what you're going to get in the game. It then goes to the animator, and he gets to have a lot of fun adding the action, whether it's on the battle map, it's in the idle, on the adventure map, all the movements then get put in by the animator to give it really a lot more life. Then finally, after the animator's done having his fun with it, it goes to the technical artist. Now the technical artist's job is to take all that data of the unit and integrate it into the game itself. So he's using basically an import into the Unity engine so that the unit ends up looking as good as it does in the game. So that's the basic flow of how we get that. Now some of the influences and some of the inspirations for our factions might be interesting. For the Vaulters, for instance, the idea is that they have a very high-tech, modern-looking pieces of armor, but that are connected by things like copper rivets and twine and leather straps. There's an artist named Gareth Pugh who does a lot of recycled, reused art that was one of the inspirations for the look of the faction. For the Ardent Mages, we used, one of the inspirations at least, was a photographer, Joel Peter Witkin, who does these very macabre images of bodies that look almost like dead bodies that have a lot of scarification and strange piercings and that sort of thing, which is a very good inspiration for this sort of very spooky atmosphere of the Ardent Mage faction. For instance, the Broken Lord faction, we wanted to do a traditional or somewhat traditional medieval armor, but in this case, much more of an Indo-Persian look. So it wasn't the standard Western chivalric crusade-style armor that you usually see in fantasy games. So you see different shapes, different curves in the Broken Lords. The Necrophages, that was an easy one. We went really into insects and basically looked at a lot of interesting, colorful, strange insects, their appendages, the mandibles, the claws, the wings, how they looked, how they flew, how they move, and that's what the inspiration, not just for the 2D art, but also for the animator, came from there. Now, those of you who played Endless Space might be thinking about links between the Necrophage and the Craver faction. Notice some similarities between them. I'm not going to go into that here, but I think that's interesting. The next faction would be the Roving Clans. Now, the Roving Clans, we wanted to have this feeling of impermanence, living in encampments and moving. So we actually borrowed some of the images and some of the feel of it from the Mongol tribes, and yet the buildings should be reminiscent a bit of the Tibetan style buildings. So it's really a mix of that sort of Central East Asian culture that you'll see in the Roving Clans. For the Wild Walkers, because of their history of savagery and this furor that they have called the sharing, you may see something in the Wild Walker characters in the units that looks almost a little bit animal, a little bit savage. So the next faction would be the Draken. Now the Draken being dragons, we actually had some trouble bringing them down to sort of a human size without putting clothing on them, because once you put clothing on a dragon, it's like, you know, My Little Iguana or something. It just looks very strange. So the art department had a real challenge in maintaining the sort of the strength and the presence of a dragon, and yet bringing it down into the shape of a humanoid. So that was their challenge. Finally, of course, is the Cultists. Now this faction was designed by the community. So we had community artists coming up with ideas that we bounced back and forth to finally come up with what you'll see as a sort of very interesting mix between mechanical, unliving masks and sort of strange, fantastic machinery. It's a very strange look compared to the other factions in the game, but I think it's a very interesting one. So we hope you'll like that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the terrain. We didn't have terrain in Endless Space, so it was a big challenge for the studio, both artistic and programming points of view, to put terrain into Endless Legend. And we didn't just want generic 2D terrain, flat 2D, a couple of trees, and you move your troops around. We decided the terrain really should be at the heart of the gameplay. And to do that, we had to have the terrain be almost a living element of the game. That was very tough for the artists because they came out with these things that looked realistic and yet had sort of a hexagonal overlay on them. But at the end of the day, you had a hard time either reading the hexagons or believing the bushes and the mountains you were looking at. So what we finally did was one of the artists went away, came back with this idea and said, look, they're hexagons, let's make them look like hexagons, but really cool hexagons. So thanks very much for listening. That's all for the art direction for now. If you have more questions or comments, please let us know. We'll get back to you. We're very happy with the art direction and the work that's been done in the game, so we'd be very happy to share some more on that. Thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.